Hi everyone, welcome back. There's an island in Japan to which biologists were trying to entice albatross to come and to nest and to mate. And so to get the birds to land there, they put some decoy albatrosses, some wooden decoys on the island. And it worked. The albatross began to land on the island and it began to nest there and eventually to use it as a breeding ground. There was one male albatross nicknamed Deco who spent 2 years trying to entice one of the decoys to mate with him. He built her a nest. He drove off all of the other male albatrosses that came around. He wooed her consistently, sitting faithfully by her side. He was dedicated and invested. She was beautiful, but she wasn't real. She was made of wood. Now we're in chapter 17 of Revelation this week, and we see what seems to be a beautiful woman. But on the inside, she is not at all what she appears to be on the outside. Chapter 17, verse 1 says, "One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you.'" Now just stop there for a second. If you skip ahead to chapter 21, verse 9, it says there, "One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you.'" Now this is almost exactly the same words. The same angel or group of angels shows something to John in each of these places, and in each instance John sees a woman. In chapter 17, it's a woman riding a beast who's called a harlot or a prostitute, and in chapter 21, it's the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Each of these women is likened to a city. The prostitute is likened in chapter 17 to Babylon, and the bride of the Lamb is likened to New Jerusalem. The first one is full of abominations and filth. The second one is holy and faithful. The first one is dressed in scarlet and purple, and the second one in clean, pure linen. The contrast is deliberate. Now, we're not looking at chapter 21 for a few weeks yet, but we want to keep the contrast in mind here in chapter 17 in order to understand a lesson for us from this chapter. Both of these women are portrayed in terms of their faithfulness or lack of faithfulness. The woman in this chapter is a prostitute, and she is portrayed as unfaithful. The bride of the Lamb in chapter 21 is showed as pure and holy and faithful. So I want to start by talking about how God uses these images in Scripture. Throughout the Bible, God uses the marital relationship as symbolic of spiritual faithfulness. In the Old Testament, God called Israel his wife. He is pictured as a faithful husband who has a covenant relationship of love with his people. When Israel became unfaithful and worshipped idols, God called Israel an adulterous wife. Passages where you could see that are Psalm 136, verse 39, Ezekiel 6:9, and Hosea 4:12. God is always pictured as a husband who patiently waits for the return of his faithless wife and who receives her back into a covenant relationship of love again. An example is Hosea 2, verses 19 to 20 and verse 23. In the New Testament, the church is pictured as a holy and pure bride. The return of Jesus for the church is pictured as the moment the bride comes, or rather the groom comes and takes the bride into the wedding banquet. And in verse 21, we're going to see the marriage supper, the wedding banquet of the Lamb and his bride, the church. So in chapter 17, this woman who is being pictured as a prostitute or an adulteress, it is primarily putting spiritual unfaithfulness in view. Sexual immorality may be a part of this, but the spiritual unfaithfulness is the primary picture. So the angel is showing the punishment of the prostitute who sits on many waters. It says that the kings of the earth commit adultery with her, and the people of the earth are drunk with the wine of her adultery. The woman is sitting on a beast. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns and is covered with blasphemous names. Now this is a very similar description to the one we had of the Antichrist in chapter 13. This is the Antichrist. And this woman seems to derive some of her power from the beast, and the scarlet color connects the woman, the beast, and the dragon, Satan, who is described as a red dragon. The woman is riding the beast, so there is a close association between these three. Now, this is not your garden variety, back alley prostitute. She's beautiful and well-dressed. She's wearing purple and scarlet, which in the ancient world was only worn by the wealthy and by rulers. She's dripping with gold and jewels and pearls, and she has a gold cup in her hand. This is a high-priced call girl. She's beautiful and she's successful. The cup is full of the filth of her adulteries, and she has a name on her forehead. Now, this would have been a familiar thing in the ancient world, as prostitutes often wore a ribbon across their forehead with their name on it. Her name is long. It is the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth, and that's not even the whole of it. But she's not only unfaithful, she's the mother of unfaithfulness. She is committed to her unfaithfulness. And there are two other parts of her name, Mystery and Babylon the Great. Now, the identity of Babylon the Great is discussed by every teacher or scholar who writes about Babylon, about Revelation, and there are a number of options. But she's also called Mystery. Remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about the fact that in the Bible, a mystery is not something that you can decode by following the clues and figuring it out. A mystery is something that hasn't yet been revealed. So the identity of this woman has not yet been revealed by God. We can talk about options, but we don't know exactly what she's going to look like when she's here. And even all of our options might be wrong. So here are some of the ideas that have been floated around in case you're curious. One is that she is symbolic of a system, the world's ways, which are deceptive and lead us from God. It is opposed to God and based on love of the world. Now, we know this system exists in the world because other parts of the New Testament tell us that is true. But is that all that this means? Well, another idea is that in addition to being a system, she's also tied to a specific city, an actual city. And there are three that are suggested. The first is Rome. At the time this was written, Rome ruled over all the kings of the earth. It was also the city of 7 hills, and we saw in this passage that the woman rides a beast, and the 7 heads of the beast are 7 hills. So some think this is Rome. Some people tie the last beast in Daniel's vision with the kingdom of the Antichrist and think that he may have the seat of his government in the city of Rome. Another possible city is Jerusalem. The reason for thinking that it might be Jerusalem is that adultery breaks the marital covenant. God's covenant was with Israel, and that covenant had its seat in Jerusalem, kind of centered around the temple. The idea is that you can't have a broken covenant unless you had an established covenant that got broken, and that established covenant had its central point in Jerusalem, and so therefore some people think that might be the city. The third specific city suggested is Babylon itself. Perhaps the place of the rule of the Antichrist will be a city in the area of where original Babylon was, or in that region. And it's possible that this is another city, and the name of Babylon is just simply used symbolically to symbolize the pagan and luxurious, sensuous nature of this place. Now, the final options presented is that this is a religious institution. Some religious institutions may continue even after the church is taken away, since there are non-believers in them. They may even end up being run entirely by non-believers. Religious institutions that continue on even though true believers are gone. So, and that is assuming that you think the rapture happens prior to this, which may be another question. So, one of the ideas could be that this is an ungodly and idolatrous religious system that casts its power and influence in with the Antichrist. But it's a mystery. So we're going to have to wait and see what God does when he reveals this to us, what this is. There is one thing we do seem to know. Babylon is some sort of spiritual entity. The imagery of unfaithfulness puts the focus on the spiritual unfaithfulness of Babylon. This is idolatrous in nature. It's religious in nature. It will be attractive and successful on the outside. It will attract people with its success and wealth, but what it looks like and what it is on the inside are not the same thing. The woman we see is riding the beast. Now, there are two different ways to interpret this. One is that she is controlling the Antichrist, at least at the beginning, or it could be that she's riding the wave of his success. that she's using his success as a vehicle for her own. It does seem that she derives some of her power from the beast at this point. Now this woman has worldwide influence. It says she sits on many waters. Kings of the world and the common people all come to her, drawn to her intoxicating adulteries. We know she's opposed to God and she hates believers. Verse 6 says she's drunk on their blood. She takes pleasure in their suffering. Babylon, whoever she is, will reach the zenith of her power and influence in the final days. But she is alive and well on the earth today. She is the adultery that draws people away from God and into the worship of something else. It will be much more blatant in the future, but this draw into the worship of the world exists around us today. It's not that she lives in our world, but we live in hers. She represents a system opposed to God, but it's pretty attractive, and we could easily see it as beautiful and worthy of attention. God draws a very strong picture of her here. He wants to show us that she looks attractive, but that is evil to the core. And that's because she's deceptive. It would be difficult to see her for what she really is. Evil and spiritual unfaithfulness can look deceptively attractive and even deceptively good. The end of verse 6 says, John was astonished. Now there are different ideas as to why. Perhaps it's because he was told he would see the judgment of the harlot, and instead he sees this proud, successful woman with riches and pomp. No defeat anywhere in sight. In verse 7, the angel says he will explain the mystery of the woman and the beast. And he goes on to give us some info. The beast is described as the one who was, now is not, and will come out of the abyss. This is similar to how Jesus is described as the one who was, who is, and who is to come. This beast is being described as a parody of the risen Christ. Verse 8 says that the inhabitants of the earth will be astonished by the beast. The phrase the inhabitants of the earth is consistently used to describe those who do not believe. They have their entire focus on life on earth, no eternal perspective. Their focus is worldly. All their love and desires are earthly. They will be impressed by the beast and will follow him. Now the next couple of verses are kind of confusing. I'm going to start reading in verse 9 to 11. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he will remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7th and is going to his destruction. This calls for a mind with wisdom. What does that mean? Why do we need wisdom? Well, maybe there are a few reasons. First, we need wisdom because the draw of Babylon is strong, and we need wisdom to see through her adulterous lures. In Revelation, the contrast between the woman on the beast and the bride of the Lamb is clear. But that's from God's perspective. Our perspective is less clear. We don't always see things clearly. We need wisdom to see through the external beauty of Babylon to the evil inside. We need wisdom to know how to live like the bride instead of the prostitute. How do we live differently? What decisions do we need to make today in the light of that? This requires wisdom. When the time comes and this ungodly system comes to full power, those who live in that time will need wisdom to see her for what she is. They will need more wisdom than we do because it will be very costly to stay pure from her ways. Now back to the beast. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now again, some think this is Rome, the city of 7 hills, but to compound it, the word for hills could also be translated mountains. And mountains are sometimes used to represent kings or rulers in Scripture. Jesus as a king is represented as a mountain in Daniel 2, verse 35. So that would maybe tend to move it away from the idea of the city of Rome. The angel goes on to say the 7 heads are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is still to come. The one who is still to come will remain for a little while. And the beast is an eighth king, but also belongs to the seventh. So now that we've cleared all that up, yeah, right. This is totally confusing, and there's no way we can know what all this means. The 10 horns are not any easier. They are 10 kings who have not come to power yet, but will receive a short period of power and authority. Now, there have been efforts made to identify these 10 kings. For quite a while, people said they were 10 nations that made up the European Common Market, or the European Union, as it's also called. But that group now has more than 10 nation members, and the numbers fluctuate up and down. So who knows? And there are other ideas that have been put forward as to who they are. We do know the purpose of the kings. They exist only to give their power to the beast. They hate God. They're set in opposing God. They're going to make war against the Lamb. Now, if ever there was a pointless endeavor, that's it right there. The Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and will have with him his chosen faithful followers. Those faithful followers will have suffered under the rule of the beast, but are victorious with the Lamb in his victory. The woman sits on many waters, verse 15 says, and that there are many nations and multitudes and languages. She has worldwide influence. It seems at the beginning that this woman and the beast will be in cahoots, working together. But at some point, likely in the middle of that 7-year period we keep hearing about in Revelation, the beast will destroy the woman, this religious system. The beast has made use of her for a time, but when he gets firmly established and feels he has power on his own, he's going to get rid of her. This is likely when he will set up an image of himself in the temple and declare that all people must worship him. That's in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4. He's going to declare himself to be God. And when that time comes, he won't need this religious system. I'm going to read from chapter 17, verses 16 and 17. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. They leave her naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. All things that speak of shame and destruction, and they're images of destruction that are used in other parts of the Old Testament. Her defeat will be total. The beast will destroy Babylon, the mother of harlots. Now, this is typical of the self-destructive nature of sin and evil. There's no unity or loyalty in the kingdom of Satan. Satan just uses others for his own ends, and those he uses on earth do the same. They destroy their former allies when they're done with them. The goal of the beast is to be proclaimed God, so he will destroy Babylon. Even though both are equally evil and both oppose God, he will also oppose her at one point and destroy her. Verse 17 says, God put it in their hearts to do this, to accomplish his purposes. It's in the same way that God used Babylon, the nation in the Old Testament, to judge Israel, and then used the Medes and Persians to judge and destroy Babylon. God is sovereign, and he enacts judgment using whatever means he chooses. This woman is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, says the last verse. Now again, we're not exactly sure what city, but she's powerful, beautiful, and successful for a time. The point of this passage is that Babylon is going to be destroyed. She's beautiful and successful. She's representative of an affluent, sensual, and religiously evil system, but she's doomed. She's set for destruction. She lives today in our world, and she's going to grow in power in the final days of human history before she's destroyed. So how much do we want to invest in her today? In a doomed world system? Like that foolish albatross Deco who tried for 2 years to woo a wooden decoy. Looks nice on the outside, but nothing on the inside. Babylon is worse because the inside is full of rotting filth and evil. She offers temporary pleasure, but her destruction is eternal. So why get involved with her? The bride of the Lamb, on the other hand, is dressed in linen, pure and white. Her beauty is internal, the beauty of a pure and faithful heart. She is suffering at the moment and will do so even more in the final days, but her victory is a sure thing. She will reign eternally with the Lamb, secure in his victorious reign. As believers, the call for us is to live separately from the influence of the seductive and doomed system. We are to guard our hearts against the lure of the idolatry of this world. We need to exercise care as to where we invest ourselves. How terrible to get to heaven and to have invested the time that God gave us into a doomed system, chasing a false decoy. That's not to say we should pull away from the world and hide somewhere in some Christian commune and isolate ourselves. We have a job to do here, to reach other people with the good news of Jesus Christ, to be the hands that extend God's mercy to others. But we need to guard our hearts against the influence of the idolatrous system of this world that will lead us away from worshiping God and make us worship a false and doomed system. Proverbs 31:30-31 comes to mind. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise in the city gates. What are we investing in? Choose what is real and what will endure, not what's doomed.